And this gets a little bit to the Thomas Gilman conflict mode where you choose to be accommodative because the danger in harming the relationship is much worse than the actual argument that you're having.
Welcome back to the Faculty Factory podcast, everybody. I'm Kim Skarupski, the Associate Dean for Faculty Development at Johns Hopkins University. And on today's episode, we have my colleague, Dr. Dave Yousem. David Yousem is our Associate Dean for Professional Development. Hi, Dave.
Hey, Kim, how you doing?
Good. I'm so grateful, and we've had such great feedback from your snippets. You've done so much great work for us and so much good content here and difficult conversations. This is a tough one, and where do they come from? How do they work? Lead us through that.
Sure. Well, Difficult Conversations is the title of a book by Douglas Stone and his colleagues as part of the Harvard Negotiation Project, and it's been purchased and read by millions of people, and it's sort of one of the many different paradigms for dealing with a difficult conversation and conflict. And I really like it a lot. I think that it has a lot of good value to it. And like anything, when you read these type of books, if you come out with, just a few important points that you can utilize in your daily life or in those times when you're in conflict, I think that it's a worthwhile read. It's a paperback book. It's not all that large. What it does have is a lot of great examples of conversations between people and sort of analyzing them, dissecting them for the good parts and the bad parts. The concept with Difficult Conversations in this Harvard Negotiation Project is that whenever you're in a difficult conversation about a conflict that you're having with somebody, there's really three levels of conversation. There's kind of the fact level, which is what they call the what happened level, which is just getting the facts right so that you're on a level playing field as far as what exactly happened between you and this person that you're in conflict with. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a moment. The second level is the emotions, and that is, we all have little triggers of things that we get, sort of hot under the collar about. And then once we get emotional, sometimes, our logic will sometimes fly away, or we may say things that are
right.
We don't really feel deeply or mistakenly say.
Activate the lizard brain.
Level,
yeah.
There you go. The hippocampal, ambush where you're just, spouting out stuff that you may or may not mean, and you certainly may regret saying.
Right.
But at the same time, we have to recognize that when you're in conflict or when you're having a difficult conversation, you're going to have an emotional response to what people say. And the third part, which I found the most fascinating part, is there is the identity level. And this gets to that part of it that we get so defensive about, because in this difficult conversation or this conflict that you're having with someone, it may get to the point where you start doubting yourself. And when you start doubting yourself, I don't remember all of them. Actually, you have more psychology background than I do. You get very protective of the id?
Yeah.
And you go into a highly defensive mode. And so when that conversation starts dipping into a point where you start feeling like someone's suggesting that you're not a good person,
or you're not smart, or you failed at something,
exactly, or you're not competent. Well, it elicits even a stronger reaction, and often you stop listening, you just get really, really defensive. And so in the description of these different levels, the Harvard Negotiation Project group talks about how to make it more effective at each of these levels in dealing with the facts, in dealing with the emotions, and in dealing with the identity issues. And I really think it's a good read.
Yeah. So go through this, because I'm always intrigued by that first element of what happened and talking about facts. And I'm putting my little fingers up, going air quotes around facts, because there's your facts and there's my facts, and then there's the facts in between. So walk us through this.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that this concept and the book is even more relevant in our day and age, where we talk about alternative facts, or we talk about what is the actual reality, unfortunately, and this is an issue that the media is debating, et cetera. So, I mean, I think there's a difference between maybe 2 points of view or 2 observations of what happened versus that part that is actually what happened. What the difficult conversation theory is that you have to get to a point where the 2 people are describing what happened from a third person. We can agree about that this happened, this happened, this happened. Now, you may interpret it differently than I, but can we, as a third person narrator, describe what exactly transpired in this problem that you and I are having in this conflict? Uh-huh. And part of that conflict, and one of again, I have these certain takeaways from the book. One of the takeaways from the book that I thought was really important was the difference between intent and impact.
Right.
So we sometimes say, Kim hung up the phone on me, and I will impute an intent on behalf that, she was angry at me for what I last said, and that was her, and that's why she did it. I only saw that you hung up the phone on me, but I started thinking about, what was your intent, and that becomes sort of my fact, but it's not real, right?
Right.
It's my interpretation of it.
And I would say that was not my intention at all. I did not intend to insult you. I did not intend to hurt your feelings. And then it's a recognition of the other, but that was the impact. So your intentions have to be taken in light of the impact on the other person. And that's what you and I learned in our mediation training, that a part of that exploration of what happened is describe your experience. What did you experience? How did you experience that situation, that event? How did you experience it? And you and I learned that you asking about the experience is important, because no one can ever negate or refute your experience. They can negate and refute facts. That's not how it happened at all. And that's not the way I recall it. No, he wasn't wearing a hat. He was wearing a visor. So that, nobody can ever say, you're absolutely wrong. You did not experience it that way. Dave, you're incorrect. You were falsely experiencing that. So I think that's another way of, exploring what happened, is that the experiences gets you to this idea of a third neutral party of, all right, let's separate my reality from a neutral reality.
Exactly. Then that neutral reality is what they refer to as the third person version of it. So if I can go back to my analogy, I'm talking with you, and we're sort of in a area of a disagreement, and suddenly, the phone goes dead. And so I say, she hung up on me because of what I said. And the impact of that is I get angry with you and say, that Kim, she's stubborn. What I don't know is that, there was a technical disconnection, or you get another phone call about, an emergency in the family, and you don't get back to me. So exploring that, as you said, with the other person, sometimes you realize that what you thought happened,
it's not at all. Yeah.
It's not at all, right.
We create these stories about things that are false stories sometimes.
Exactly. So the intent versus impact was probably my biggest take-home message with regard to the what happened part, and instead exploring with the person and get to a third-person narration of, so this is what actually happened that we can agree on. And the second part, obviously, is the emotions, and sometimes, we have an emotional response to something that is actually not related to the event that led to that emotion. So, for example, if I have a past history of having issues with my mother, that she would always hang up on me whenever I would, bring up a certain topic, and then, when the phone shuts down with Kim, I get a emotional reaction to it from my past experience and what I've had happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and sometimes it's valid, sometimes it's not valid, and I think one of the lessons of the Difficult Conversations book is using that I language, which is, Kim, when that phone went dead, I felt like you were not being respectful of me and shutting me off in midstream and not being cooperative. And using those I words is a lot better than saying, Kim, you were uncooperative,
right.
You were mean to me, rather than this is what my experience was, even in the emotional. We talked about it with the facts, but it's also on the emotional side.
Yeah. That whole, as soon as we start thinking you, or especially you always, or you never, you're, of course, putting someone on defense. Absolutely.
Right. So, and this gets back to one of the talents or skills that we all must learn, and that is that reflective listening and making sure we understand what the person's experience was and repeating it back and getting affirmation that we are receiving the correct information, even as it relates to emotions that the person's feeling. So that's the second level that they describe, and they talk about some ways of improving that. And then the third level is the identity, and as you and I described, they define the identity issues as three different ways. One is, am I worthy? Am I a good person? And am I worth loving? And am I competent? And I think that although those may not be all encompassing, they do hit the spot for a lot of us. I mean, for example, when the implication is that you are doing something, you're lying or you're doing something unethical, boy, that will elicit a strong reaction at the identity level of, self-preservation and being very defensive. And, this person is accusing me of being a bad person in the eyes of the world and morality. Oh boy, I'm going to fight that, pretty hard. And recognizing when you're straying in that way, in sort of an accusatory way, is problematic. And one of the lessons I think that Difficult Conversations talks about is keeping it to the episode rather than generalizing about the person. So, Kim, when you told me about this particular event, perhaps you were misguided as far as the facts around the event, is a lot better than saying, you're a liar.
Yeah.
Again, we get back to the emotions things, but to say to someone you're a liar, it just gets those hackles up, and the person's going to be very defensive because it's an identity issue. And,
right.
And similarly, they talk.
Yeah, I was just going to say you're characterizing someone and putting a label on them versus criticizing a behavior. So you're a bad kid versus that thing you did was bad. That's the idea of good parents. Ideally, they're not giving the message to their kids overtly or covertly that they're bad kids, but they do bad things sometimes. So that's the same thing when you say you're lazy, you're stupid, you're worthless, you're sloppy. That's putting that label. That's you're not a good person versus sometimes when this happens, you tend to be, or you can be, or your behavior looks like. That's not impugning the integrity of the character of the person.
Right. It's in this situation.
Yeah.
This is what I experienced you doing or whatnot. But I'm not making a general blanket statement about you in toto.
Right.
And in particular, those things, you could say to me, Dave, about you weren't funny, that was an inappropriate joke. That to me does not strike at my core as much as if you say, Dave, you're not reading those MRI scans up to snuff. I'm not sure that you're competent. That's clearly that's something that gets a lot more of a reaction, and that's why they say of those identity things, it's are you worthy of being loved? So this is sort of the relational way. Are you a good person? That's where you're a liar or you're doing it on something unethical, and are you competent? And the other piece that we all go through in academia and elsewhere is this concept of the imposter syndrome. So this business about competency is another thing that we're all very sensitive to because, with few exceptions, most of us are not as self-confident as we may, put ourselves out there.
Right.
All of us are a little bit scared about being challenged and someone recognizing that we're not as good as either they may think we are, or that we may try to present that we are.
Right.
We are, and that's where this "am I competent" part of the identity conversation gets just so much emotional reaction as well as defensiveness.
Yeah. So both on the receiving end and on the giving end, as leaders, we have to be really aware of not only our own triggers and the things that we've talked before in past snippets of our values and our mission and our conflict styles, and knowing where we're going to tend to go awry when we are under stress and not eating well, not sleeping well, having a lot of things going on, and also then how we are not only taking that from other people, our superiors or colleagues, but then how we're dishing it out to our colleagues and our staff and our trainees in the lab, and being aware of that, the effect and the impact, regardless of our own intentions. So this difficult conversations, and the book has a lot to do with not only how we engage with it, but the difficulties we cause, among others, by the way we maybe treat them.
Yeah. Another concept I want to get to, Kim, because I've found it to be very effective when I've tried to talk through a conflict with people, is this thing that they talk about, which is not to assign blame, but to try to assign a contribution. And although it's semantics, there's such a positive connotation to contribution and contributing that it's a lot easier to get people to recognize their piece in a conflict if you ask what their contribution was. So, for example, I was just doing this last night with one of my colleagues who was in a fight with another colleague, and I kept saying, was there anything that you did that you can see might have contributed to the misunderstanding?
I love it.
What was your piece that you contributed? And it's a lot better terminology than to say I blame you, or you did you did it in a way.
You're wrong. I'm right. Yeah.
Right, because people will always be, and this person I was dealing with kept saying, well, but she did this and she did this and she did this and she did this, and I said that may be so, but what was your piece that you contributed to it that led either heightened the misunderstanding? Mm-hmm. And although I wasn't entirely successful last night with getting through it, it was a better conversation than just focusing on the other person, because too often that's the problem, is that we keep blaming the other person, and you did this and you did that, and not recognizing what our little piece might have been that triggered that reaction to the other person. And when you can admit your piece, your contribution, it's more likely that the other person is going to meet you and say, yeah, and maybe the way I handled this might have contributed to your unhappiness as well.
Yeah.
So it's taking a little bit of ownership and not making into the blame game.
Yeah. What I love about that, every time you talk about that in our leadership courses, I think it's such a valuable nugget, because like you said, it's so easy, and it may be absolutely correct that the other person, for example, the senior faculty member or the mentor, may be completely wrong. I mean, that could be true. And it may also be true that the mentee or the junior faculty member's difficulty with standing up for her or himself, or being a turtle and avoiding conflict and putting that off, or not following up with something minor, relatively minor, is the contribution. So I like that it can just be a very subtle thing where we could agree with the person. You're exactly right. That behavior is unconscionable. We will not tolerate that. They're completely wrong in that situation. And let's think about this going forward. What might you have done differently? Well, I may have nipped it in the bud sooner. I may have had the courage to say this or that. In the future, I might prefer to or establish standards in front and set clear boundaries. So that practice of asking people, what I love about how you do this, really is a growth opportunity. And it's especially important for leaders to understand that waltz that is just between two and more people, that there's rarely a circumstance where, we don't contribute in some regard to whatever happened.
Right. And in fact, Kim, in your statements, you also got to another of the lessons that I got from difficult conversation. That is those but discussions where you yes, but. And I know, we have our colleague, Catherine, who is so good at being able to convert but sentences to and sentences, yes. Because in using the word but, you immediately get people to be defensive and sort of doubt you, et cetera. So right.
That's Catherine Morrison you're talking about. We love her in negotiation. Talking about every time you say but, it's like, oh, here comes a hit. Dave, you're really great on those snippets, but, and it's like, okay, here we go. Yes, you're really good, and so it's a real opener to replace all your buts with ands.
Right. And the final lesson, I think, from difficult conversations is something that I facetiously say: it's better to be married than right. And what I mean by that, sometimes it's better to preserve the relationship than to continue to fight on a topic that may or may not be that important. So, and this gets a little bit to the Thomas Gilman conflict mode, where you choose to be accommodative because the danger in harming the relationship is much worse than the actual argument that you're having, about.
Right.
And I think that sometimes you have to make that calculation, and again, it's sort of a crazy little expression, better to be married than right, but, if you're constantly having
one up somebody argument, and be the winner and keeping tallies and scores.
Right. That's not helpful or a way to grow a relationship, and
or
so
build a team or build a reputation as being collegial and collaborative.
Exactly. So those are some of the other lessons from difficult conversations. But as I said, although I give a seminar and try to make it relevant to our world of academia and faculty development, it really is very helpful in any type of interpersonal relationship, and I highly recommend that book. Again, the first author being Douglas Stone.
Great. As usual, Dave, you are wonderful. Folks, you've been learning and listening to Dr. David Yousem, our Associate Dean for Professional Development here at Johns Hopkins. He is the Vice Chairman of Program Development, the author of the Neuroradiology textbook, former Division Director of Neuroradiology. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. The mission of the Faculty Factory is to build and support a community of leaders in faculty development who share tools, resources, wisdom, and encouragement in service to our faculty members, schools, and institutions. We encourage you to go to facultyfactory.org to find out more. Get in touch with me, ask me any questions. Maybe you want to be interviewed on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in to Faculty Factory Podcast. We'll see you next time. The Faculty Factory podcast and website is sponsored by the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine Office of Faculty. For more information, visit facultyfactory.org.